is God's people, and we've seen this comparison a few other times in Isaiah. We saw it in Hosea as well. And he begins expressing to Israel and talking about this time that they did not bear, that they did not break forth in the singing and cry aloud. They did not travail with child. And what he's talking about is this time that they've been separated from him as his wife. And, a husband that is separated from his wife, unable to have child, unable to have children for obvious reasons. And so he's talking about this time, that there was this time that they were without him, that they were barren. And not only were they away from him, but they weren't fruitful in him. He wasn't blessing them, and he was the one that put them into captivity for their sins. But he talks about now that Israel, after their time, they've begun turning back to the Lord. And he mentions here, he says, for more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married wife. He tells them, he says, the children being that of the people of Israel. He says, they are more than those that when they were married. Basically, he's saying, the ones that have come forth, the children of Israel during this time of captivity, they have decided to follow me again. They are seeking me again. They are looking to my face. And so they are greater than those that whenever I was with them, whenever I was blessing them, when I was giving them all of the wonderful things that I would do for them, the prosperity that they have, they wouldn't follow me. They wouldn't do what I asked of them to do. During the time of plenty, the time when they should have been excited to have me. And the Lord, as well, because of that, is going to now bring them back, and He's going to, as it says here in verse 2, enlarge them. He says, enlarge the place of thy tent, and let them stretch forth the curtains of thine habitations. Spare not, lengthen thy cords, and strengthen thy stakes. And so they've spent this time in captivity where they haven't prospered. They haven't been fruitful. They haven't borne anything. And the Lord's telling them now, He's saying, this time of you being barren, this time of you not being fruitful for me, or me not blessing you, you not being with me, this has come to an end. Because now things are going to change. You're going to increase with child, as he's bringing here in this illustration that he's painting for us. He's telling basically, you need to prepare for what's coming. You need to enlarge your tent. You need to make your house bigger. Whenever I was a kid, my parents, we had a very small house. It was actually, when they first built it, it was a two-room house, and one of those rooms was the bathroom. And it was only, I don't know exactly, I would say it was probably less than 1,000 square foot, if that. It probably was a lot less than that. Very small. And at one point, my dad ended up building a room inside of it. And this room was big enough to fit a bunk bed and a crib for my brother. And so there was, at one point, there was me, my sister, and my brother were all in this one room. And then my second sister was born. There's 4 of us kids. So when Mom was pregnant with the 4th one, my middle sister, she told Dad, she said, we got to have a bigger house. We got to have room. We don't have enough room for all of this now. And so I got started building the bigger house. And because it needed more room. There wasn't enough room. And this is what takes place. So I tell you, people, they realize there's not enough room. And so in preparation for that, expand the house or get a bigger house. And the Lord's saying, prepare, because I'm getting ready to bless you. You're getting ready to be fruitful under me again. I'm getting ready to be with you again. So get ready for it. Enlarge your tent. He says, stretch forth the curtains of thine habitation. Spare not. Lengthen thine cords. Strengthen thy stakes. The cords that hold up the tent, the stakes that, you need bigger stakes to hold up a greater tent. He says, get ready. And he continues into verse 3 and says, for thou shalt break forth on the right hand and on the left, and thy seed shall inherit the Gentiles and make the desolate cities to be inhabited. When God took Israel into captivity, using the Babylonians, what happened was, and He told them this, He said it was going to happen, people came in and began inhabiting the land because it was empty. There's nothing there. And so He's telling them now, He's saying, you're getting ready, you're going to be taken back, you're going to re-inhabit the places that were made desolate before. And He says that when you do it too, notice here He says that you will break forth the right hand and on the left. They're just going to go in every direction. Well, there was so many of us kids growing up. There's 5 of us growing up. Now there's 6 of us. We're just every single direction. Mom, when we went to the store, she'd make us walk single file because we could clog up an aisle of the store pretty quickly. We were every which way. So we had to, every single one of us, it was single file behind. You could always, sometimes she'd send one of us older kids to go get something she forgot. You could always find Mom because there was always a train of kids behind them with another shopping cart. Always easy to find them. But the Lord says they're going to be in every direction. You're going to be fruitful in every way. And so He continues here and tells them as well that there's no need for them to be fearful anymore. He says in verse 4, "Fear not, for thou shalt not be ashamed, neither be thou confounded. For thou shalt not be put to shame, for thou shalt forget the shame of thy youth, and shalt not remember the reproach of thy widowhood anymore." And so the Lord tells them, He says, this time that you've spent in this time of widowhood, of being separated from Me, where you were ashamed, where you were confounded by what I was doing, what was taking place, He says, what's going to happen is you're going to be so fruitful, I'm going to be doing all these things, that you're going to forget about the way that these things were. That you're not going to any longer be concerned with these things that took place in the past, that now you're going to be focused on here and now. A lot of times when things get really good, we forget the harder times. Not as prominent on the mind. It says you're no longer going to have to be ashamed of the things that were taking place here. And the reason He says for this is why, He says in 5, He says, "For thy Maker is thine husband, the Lord of hosts is His name, and thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, the God of the whole earth, shall He be called." And He says, and the reason for this is because the one that is prospering you, that is providing for you, the one that is your husband in this scenario, He says, is your Maker. The Lord has referred to Himself a few times in Isaiah as being their Maker, and each time I like to point out that the Lord is the Maker of them as a nation. They owe their whole existence as a nation to the Lord. But then also, as what we often think about as our Maker, is the one that created us, one that created the earth and all that is in it. He says, the one that has created all, that has prospered your nation, that has created the earth itself, the universe itself, He says, He is the one that is taking care of you now. I am taking care of you, so you don't need to worry about this. I have the means, I have the ability to do these things. It is not going to be, I'm not lacking in my ability to provide for you. He refers to Himself as well as thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. The greatest thing that the Lord has ever done for us is being our Redeemer, setting us free from our sins. And notice here it says, the God of the whole earth shall He be called. Yeah. At a single point in time, eventually every single person will admit that the Lord is the Lord. Every knee shall bow before Him one day. Even though there are many today that don't claim Him as God, that don't admit that He's real, He is. He is still Lord. He is still God. Now, this isn't here questioning whether or not He is the God of the whole earth at this time. It's whether or not people of the whole earth are calling Him God. He has always been God, and He always will be God, because He's the only God. And He continues and talks about His mercies for them now that He's going to pour upon them. He says in verse 6, "For the Lord hath called thee as a woman forsaken and grieved in spirit, and a wife of youth, when thou wast refused, saith thy God." He continues talking about it and compares Israel as being one that has basically been left alone early on, that was with a husband and was separated. Whether and there are many different ways this takes place, but of course, and and this is something too I want you to remember with this that he's talking about here is during their society and the way things work there, a woman without a husband to provide was desolate completely. There was no means of being taken. It was very hard to be taken care of. Really, the only option you had was prostitution. You were left with nothing without a husband, without and so one that was left desolate in their youth wouldn't have even had time to have a son to take the place and to take care of. And he says, you were in this way. This is the way that it is, but the Lord has called you back. And notice this in 7, he says, "For a small moment have I forsaken thee, but with great mercies will I gather thee." Or it says, "For a time I have forsaken you." And just a little later, he'll talk about that for a time, in verse 8, he'll even say, "For a time I hid my face from you. I kept myself at bay from you." And it was because of His wrath that He did it, which was as a result of their sin. But I want us to notice here the way he describes it. He says, "In a little wrath I hid myself." Now, I'm sure Israel, and experiencing the captivity of the Babylonians, and all the things going on with that, would not consider that to be of little wrath. We wouldn't consider it to be that way at all. But with the Lord here, He's not, the point isn't necessarily that what was taking place was little, which comparison to the wrath of eternity in hell, it is little. But what he's trying, what the focus here isn't the wrath, it's the kindness that is everlasting. As he here in 7, he says, "With great mercies will I gather you." It was with very little wrath that He forsook, that He pushed them away, that all of these things took place. But what He is going to do when bringing them back is going to be so much greater. Be so much of a greater value. The mercies that God is going to pour upon them are going to be so much greater than the wrath that they experience. And this is why they're not going to be ashamed anymore. They're not going to be confounded. They're going to be prosperous because the Lord is going to be pouring upon them His mercies, His blessings. And he continues in 8 and says, "In a little wrath I hid my face from thee for a moment." Again, he mentions this little wrath, but now he adds to it that he hid his face from them for a moment. Now again, the Babylonian captivity was 70 years. How many of us would consider 70 years to be but a moment? I mean, in the context of what we've experienced, for myself, I'm starting to realize the fact that I'm going to be 30 this year, and comparison to 70, That's over double. That's more than, that's double of what I've experienced. There are those that had only experienced the Babylonian captivity when this takes place. That's all they experience. Or a vast majority of them, if it wasn't all they've experienced, it was most of what they experienced at 70. Likely there are very few that lived through the whole thing. He calls it a small moment. And again, it's not negating what took place. The comparison is how much greater what is going to come. How much more they are going to experience. For this small amount of time, they experienced His wrath as a nation. But they will experience His everlasting kindness afterwards, which will cause Him to have mercy on them as their Redeemer. And this is something I want us to think about as well. God's wrath. Well, God's wrath here on earth is able to be appeased. In the context of Israel, His wrath for what had been done as a nation was fulfilled in 70 years. But He's talking about His kindness extending well beyond that. For us, we think about it this way. God's wrath is due to our sin, and it's appeased with Christ. It's covered with Christ. Now, again, we're not negating what Christ has done. We're not negating the significance of what has been covered. Because what needs to be, our sin is a very great debt that needs to be paid. But it's possible for it to be paid. But the flip side to that, what we gain when it is paid, is everlasting kindness, everlasting mercy. See, God's love, God's kindness, God's mercy cannot be emptied out. It is possible for His wrath to be stopped, for His wrath to be appeased, but it is not possible for His love to be given up, to be used up. It's not possible for His kindness to end. Now, I want to make this very clear here. The way that God's wrath is appeased is with the sacrifice of Christ and with our accepting of that payment. If one rejects the payment of Christ, which is the only way for it to be appeased, it is everlasting wrath in hell. There's no amount of time that we can pay that will cover that. It can be covered in another way. So He tells them, He says, you will experience this by comparison. And then verse 9, we continue, and now He talks about His increase of Israel. They've been restored back to Him, but He is going to bless them again. He says in verse 9, for this is as the waters of Noah unto me, for as I have sworn that the waters of Noah should no more go over the earth, so have I sworn that I would not be wroth with thee nor rebuke thee. Lord here makes this comparison here, and he refers to that of the promise that was given to Noah, which after the flood that covered the entire face of the world, the entire planet, and killed all people except for Noah, his 3 sons, and their wives, 8 people. The Lord made a promise, placing His rainbow in the sky, saying that never again would it take place, and that the rainbow would be a promise to that. Never again would the entire earth be destroyed by water. And that is true. But the earth will be destroyed one day. It'll be destroyed with fire. But never again by water. The Lord tells them, He says, the same promise I'm making to you, that I will no longer, there will be a day that I will no longer rebuke thee or be angry with you. And this is fulfilled again through Christ and His permanent payment for our sins. And I want us to notice here as he continues into verse 10, he even says, he says, for the mountains shall depart, and the hills be removed, but my kindness shall not depart from thee, neither shall the covenant of my peace be removed, saith the Lord, that hath mercy on thee. Now we've seen this phrase here that the mountains shall depart and the hills shall be removed. And in this instance, we're talking about this is in reference to the men and leaders of power. And we saw this in Isaiah 42 and 15. But we have another example of this outside of Isaiah. And I want us to go ahead and look at it. In Revelation chapter 6 is where we see this as well, that kind of indicates for us here that the Lord uses this comparison elsewhere. In Revelation chapter 6, verses 14 through 16, it says, and the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman and every free man hid themselves in the dens and the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of Him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of God. Or the wrath of the Lamb, which is also God. And so we see this comparison here that is talked about, and I don't want to talk about all that it means, but what the Lord is saying here is He's telling them, He's saying, no matter what changes on the earth, and even if in this instance He is talking about literal mountains and hills, He says, even if all of these things are changed, even if all of these things go away, even if all this is done away with, no matter what happens, no matter what you look at that may seem as if that was impossible to put an end to, but it does come to an end, He says, my kindness is not going to depart from you. That my kindness far and exceeds this. Endures far more than that. Whether we're talking about mountains and hills, literally we're talking about nations and powers or individuals of the great power that you look at and you go and say, there is no way they can be put an end to, and then they come to an end. Many likely looked at the Assyrians, the Medes and the Persians, the Babylonians, the Romans, and said there's no way that empire can end. What has happened to all of them? They have ended. There's been other empires that people looked at that they said there's no way they could ever be stopped. Come to an end. Some we look at America and say there's no way that America could ever be stopped, could ever be done away with. And I'm going to say this, it is possible. It is possible. America is very young compared to many other empires that have fallen. But God's everlasting kindness, God's everlasting mercy will not fail. Not in. Nothing can cause it to depart from us. Nothing can cause the Lord's covenant or the Lord's promise of peace to be removed. Because the Lord's promises are true, firm. No matter what promise it is, no matter what the Lord sets in place, it always comes to be. There's a lot of really bad things that God promised that came to be. But there are many more great, amazing, wonderful things that have come to be, continue to be, and others that will come. And even after the Lord has cleansed the earth of all unrighteousness, has poured out His final wrath upon the earth, cleansed it, His everlasting kindness, His everlasting love continue on earth forever and never end. So He continues in verse 11 and 12 and talks about their physical prosperity that they will experience. He says, "O thou afflicted, tossed with tempest, and not comforted, behold, I will lay thy stones with fair colors, and lay thy foundations with sapphires. I will make thy windows of gates, and thy gates of carbuncles, and all thy borders of pleasant stones." It speaks of them that they will experience a great prosperity and things that will take place and the way things will work. And he continues even in even greater sense and talks in 13 and 14 and says, "And all thy children shall be taught of the Lord, and great shall be the peace of thy children. In righteousness shalt thou be established. Thou shalt be far from oppression, for thou shalt not fear, and from terror, for it shall not come near thee." Now, when we look in the end of Revelation and you see the New Jerusalem coming down, you see the description of the New Jerusalem and heaven and all the things that are there, it is a picture of great prosperity. And the promises that we've seen of what will take place with Israel and the way the Lord will set up His kingdom through Israel and all of these things shows the great prosperity they will experience. And as well here it even talks that it says that all the children of it will know the Lord, will be taught of the Lord, will follow the Lord, will experience His peace, will experience the righteousness of it. That they will not be oppressed anymore. They will have no reason to fear. They'll have no reason for terror because they'll be far from it. So it won't even come near. And when the Lord sets up His protection, and of course when we see the very end, the New Jerusalem, there'll be nothing that comes that can take it, stop it. Even during the millennial reign, Israel will experience a prosperity that they had never experienced before. And with Christ as King, there will be none that can stand against it. Yes, the armies of man of Satan will at the end of the millennial reign come and fail coming up against Christ and overthrowing Him. But over 1,000-year period, they will experience nothing but prosperity. We see as well, he talks about the protection they experience in verse 15. He says, "Behold, they shall surely gather together, but not by me. Whosoever shall gather together against thee shall fall for thy sake. Behold, I have created the smith that bloweth the coals in the fire, and bringeth forth an instrument for his work. And I have created the waster to destroy. No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is of me, saith the Lord. And the Lord talks about this in His prosperity. He says that any that trying to come up against, they will fail, they'll fall. And like this, so He talks about this, He says that He is the one that created the smith that blows the coals in the fire, and that bringeth forth an instrument of His work, and have created the waster to destroy. And then He talks about this, that no weapon is formed against thee shall prosper. Now, there are many great and powerful weapons that we've seen on the earth. But they are all created by a man that was created by God, whose tools, whose materials are created by God. The Lord says, you don't need to fear the weapons of man because I am greater. Everything that they have is what I created first, is from what I created, is founded in me. So I have ultimate power over it. I have ultimate strength over it because I'm the one that's ultimately in control. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to be concerned with that. It's not going to be able to come against you. And all that would seek to come up against it and tug in judgment, the Lord says, no. You don't have to worry about that because you are in me. Your righteousness is based in me, not in anyone else. So it can't be undermined. It can't be stopped. It can't be taken away by any person because it's mine. Mine alone. Now, it's a good promise for us as well because there are many things that those would use, that they would seek to rise up against God's people, if they would seek to destroy, if they would seek to take away from. But the thing we need to remember is ultimately the Lord was the one that started it all. The Lord has the control of it all, and the greatest thing that we have, our salvation, our righteousness, is based in God and God alone. So none can take that away. No one can steal that from us. Nobody can cross it out. Because it's the Lord's. Israel experienced a lot of, and still experiences a lot of blessings of the Lord, a lot of promises of God. But those promises are no different than what we have in the Lord. As believers in the family of God, we're going to experience just as many blessings, promises. We've been adopted into the family of God. It's all secure for eternity. So no reason to fear, no reason to worry, because the one we serve is in control of all. And even if this time, for a while, seems long, even if the problems that we experience seem great, by comparison to what the Lord has for all eternity, it is nothing. It is nothing. That's not to say to